I've got two very big brain engineers, and their mission is to develop a really sweet looking truck. But the thing is, developing a truck is actually pretty difficult, and there's a lot to remember, therefore there's a lot to forget. So the first engineer, he says to the second engineer, what's that formula again? The force equals mass times the standard deviation. And the second engineer is like, no. I think it's the force equals mass times tax evasion. And the first engineer, he thinks about this a little bit, just a little bit, and he goes, yeah, that sounds about right. And that is how we ended up here. So now this example is obviously a big joke, but it's true that sometimes we hear that, yeah, that sounds about right, in situations where you wouldn't want to hear it, especially in medical diagnosis. And that's scary. These were the exact words of a friend of mine when he told me about his dad's first heart attack. And then his dad's second heart attack only 2 weeks later after misdiagnosis of the first. And then he's sitting there, his fingers crossed, his head down in front of the hospital room for the second time in 2 weeks, just because they couldn't get it right the first time. Now, our doctors are trying their best all the time to help us, but there's systematic issues where we could make improvements. Enter the stethoscope. It's at the heart of medical diagnosis, but it's nearly as old as our education system. And so, like our attempts at 21st century learning where we do most of the same things but we slap a computer onto it, it's time that we take the stethoscope digital. Now, the electronic stethoscope has been around since the early 2000s. It's kind of like autotune, but for stethoscopes. You can amplify, denoise, visualize your information. But I think that the electronic stethoscope has a lot more potential. Potential to remove this, yeah, that sounds about right in medical diagnosis. And I'll tell you about the proof of concept I built over the last week and a half, but first, we need some background. Last week, I took a test in grade 11 biology on the heart. So I can tell you with a lot of confidence, because I definitely did really well on my test, that is a heart. Yeah, that sounds about right. So blood moves through the heart and the valves are opening and closing. And if I listen to the stethoscope, I can hear this lub-dub sound. And that is the sound of the valves opening and closing. Now, machine learning kids like to call these sounds S1 and S2 because we need numbers and we need letters. Because why do we want words? That's inappropriate or whatever. But sometimes when you get lub-dub, you'll actually get a third sound, like an extra lub or an extra dub. And sometimes you'll get a whoosh or a swishing noise. This is what we call a murmur. And both of these, though are sometimes harmless, are often indications of a potentially more serious issue. And so, I was thinking about my friend and his dad, and I was thinking about medical diagnosis. And I was thinking about self-driving cars, like I often do, and I was thinking about convolutional neural networks. And then, it just hit me. And so I started my experiment. I thought, if I could take heartbeat audio, denoise it, and then run it through a CNN, can my model tell me what I just heard? So we begin at the preprocessing. Majority of the sounds that you actually care about when you listen to heartbeats are under 195 hertz. Because stethoscopes are extremely sensitive, so you'll often get sounds of like rubbing on skin or clothes. And this is so sad. So what we want to do is apply a low-pass filter so that all of the audio that's above 195 hertz we can cut. And we do this using a running mean or moving average filter. And I like to think about that like a very specific and precise line of best fit. So we use the value n, which is essentially the distance between several points of our time axis on which we want to sum up the information on the y-axis. And if we do this enough times, we can string all of these together and make a simplified format. And this n value is derived from our our cutoff frequency of 195 hertz. So we can actually remove a lot of these frequencies. Now I was staring at the second waveform, the pre-processed waveform, and I was trying to figure out if it worked or not. And I couldn't really tell. So I did what any teenager would do when trying to make a decision. If it's like, should I go to semi, or should I cut my hair, or should I buy the new AirPods? And so I asked Instagram, can you tell the difference between these two pictures, yes or no? Now the results were a little bit polarizing, but the people who knew, the people who said they knew, they really did. So some people said the lines in the right graph are more sparse, whereas the left graph seems very condensed, or there's an increase in fluctuation in the left one. Or, more accurate to the way teenagers like to speak these days, and a little bit easier to understand, they thick AF in the left screenshot. So at this point I realized that in order to tell the difference, I could probably just listen to the audio. And so let's give it a listen. Naveed, could you give the first one a click on the left side? And the second one? Yeah, so we've managed to totally cut majority of the background noise, and the heartbeat sound is quite clear. And so with this, we can now begin to put this information into our model, into our CNN. Now, CNN's main vantage point lies in pattern recognition through simplification. I like to think about it as averaging out information, or creating a heat map. So each layer of our CNN has a filter that's looking for a specific feature. For example, over here, if I want to understand smiley faces, if I'm looking for this little half circle symbol, I might find strong matches on the eyes or on the mouth. And then on the right-hand side, we can see what our layer understands about where these shapes occur in the images. Now, if we want to do this with heartbeat data, what we can do is take an array of the amplitudes, each at discrete points in time. And through all of our layers, what our model begins to do is simplify the patterns. And so we understand there's this low, 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 high, low, 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 high pattern going on. Then we give it a label. And now our model is able to understand that this pattern is associated with normal heartbeats. Now, at this point, my model was doing relatively well after I trained it, 94% accuracy. Unfortunately, that's not the whole picture. So I took a look at my validation accuracy, and then I cried. I bawled for hours, I really did, because my validation accuracy was 60%. Now, that's likely because my model was overfitting. My data set was incredibly small, 176 samples, only 124 of which were actually labeled. And so my model started to memorize the individual pieces of samples instead of understanding the patterns in them. There are a couple of fixes that I will be working on over the next few weeks to see if I can address the issue. One thing I could do, I was thinking back to my self-driving car days, and I did a lot of image augmentation, where I would make changes to I would generate batches and make changes of some of the images in order to increase variation in our data set. So over here, the original image was then panned, flipped, and darkened so that our model can get familiar with new surprises. I don't know how to do this for audio, though, and so that's something I'll be exploring over the next little while. Additionally, can I get a larger data set? That's also what I'll be looking for. I'd consider 10,000 images decent, and that's a big jump from 176, so we'll see how that goes. Remember this, S1, S2. So S1 and S2, they just continue to repeat, right? So what if we were to just split these up? And instead of using this whole string of S1, S2, we can use each of these segments as their own piece of data. This could potentially help increase the amount of data we have, and then also allow our model to focus on smaller pieces of information and pull from those instead. So as I'm thinking about my friend and his dad, and I'm thinking about medical diagnosis, I'm thinking in the future, though right now this is just a project I'm working from out of my bedroom, I'm thinking in the future, it'd be great for this to be the second opinion that doctors take. So when next time they put the stethoscope in, and they listen to your heartbeat, and they say, yeah, that sounds about right. Now they can look over to their computer and say with confidence, yeah, that definitely sounds about right. Thank you.